I'm sorry we didn't get to this sooner because it was really with me, and you alluded to it earlier. This notion of biracialism and multiracialism. If I grew up in a situation where I feel I'm not really around African Americans necessarily, my mother or father is not of direct African descent. See, you're making it hard for me even to use these terms. I'm having a hard time even explaining what I mean here. And this has really happened to me. Like I've said, I've talked about, folks like, in the 14 to 1500 places where I would say black people who went here, and I've been thinking, but did they think of themselves that way? Like, is that even an accurate description? But just work with me here for a moment. I have a mother or father who is considered white, identifies himself as white. Another parent identifies himself as black. I have, parentage, maybe grandparents' ancestry that may identify itself as, American Indian, Asian American, what have you. The point is, why don't I have the right to name myself? Why don't I have the right to identify myself with that?
As multiracial?
Yes.
You absolutely have the right to do that. I have the right to disapprove of it.
Okay.
And and here's why I disapprove of it. I had some friends who, white people in South Georgia, who adopted a baby from Brazil. And they had to go to a lot of trouble, but eventually it all came together. And I went to meetings regularly. It's a Park Service Commission, so I would see them regularly. And one time the father was telling me about all the trouble they had gone to be sure that this little boy knew his culture. That's what I don't approve of. I said, so I didn't say it to him, but I was thinking, you are teaching him that he is alien. He is not yours. Your culture is his culture because you're his parent. That doesn't stop him from learning about Brazil when you want him to know about Brazil. But why do you want to raise your child thinking that he is different from his parents in a consequential way? I think that's child abuse. And I think and that's why you'll when you read the book, assuming some of you will see that there's a certain amount of heat in the way we talk about this phenomenon, because it's a reprise of a toxic history in this country, and the people who are bringing it to life again don't realize how toxic it is. One of the lines that, again, Karen was the one who wrote this line. I loved it as soon as I saw it, but she said, in talking about the resurrection of the language of not just multiracial and so on, but even all those terms, mulatto and all the rest.
Octoroon and...
Yeah, that are racist. They came out of a racist background. And her comment was, as George Santayana almost said, people who don't know history will have no idea what they're repeating. And I think the people who have actually sponsored a movement like this don't know what a toxic history they're repeating. If you tell them, well, why don't you just go and replicate the Nuremberg laws and be done with it? And they won't even have a clue what you're talking about when you say that. The California legislature actually passed a law after much agitation by this multiracial movement, a law providing that umbilical cord blood, which I understand is used in various kinds of medical research, that it be collected and classified separately for multiracial people. And the rationale, if you go to their website and look at it, it's mind-blowing, but that there are certain kinds of diseases that may affect multiracial people more than others. It's all vague. It's just like the Martin Luther saying that witches can get milk from the cow by using a table or a handle without having to say how it works, because they didn't have to say how it worked, but they thought there's something there, and there was a big to-do when the law passed the state legislature, and it was some kind of deliverance for multiracial people. It was going to save lives. Nobody explained how. The only thing that saved the state of California from that disgrace was that the then governor vetoed it. And I don't know why. I don't know if he vetoed it for the reasons I would like to have seen it vetoed for. But anyway, he vetoed it, so it didn't disgrace the state of California. But this has become a cause for people. A few years ago, an editor from the Washington Post Sunday magazine, actually, well, it had to have been in 2010, she wrote a letter in which she complained about Barack Obama's having identified himself on his census form as black. And because she said, it's not accurate. And she went through all the incantations. I know that these things are socially constructed, but how can we have an accurate designation if people don't fill out their forms correctly? She had no idea how incoherent she was, but she had an absolute feeling of righteousness about it. She's on a campaign, she's on a crusade, and she is not alone.
I'm sorry, I just got to follow up really quickly. Do you feel that all this is somehow tied to power? Again, I mean, we talk about one of the things you're very clear about in the book is that racism is not just this fuzzy idea that people hold and that it's not enough to just be hostile. There's a history, there's power behind, there's policy. Is this tied to power?
It's certainly tied to racism, in that these are parents who know what sort of ideas, toxic ideas, can infect their children if their children are understood to be or perceived to be in any degree black. So they want a pass for their children. That's the way I put it. Because they don't want that to happen to their children. And my point about that is, once you reach the understanding that that's something that shouldn't happen to your children, you need to have the understanding that it shouldn't happen to anybody else's either.
Okay.
And that's my view about multiracial identity and all the rest, people who can't be confined within a category. No human being can be confined within a category. I used the example of Amadou Diallo. I said, well, the category that they put him in was not only too restrictive for him, but it got him killed. The police officers, everybody remembers that case. The police officers who shot him decided that he was a black man and therefore he was armed and dangerous. I actually think that if they had realized he was African, they wouldn't have concluded he was armed and dangerous, because one of the ways these things work in this country is that there's a kind of semi-pass for people of African descent who aren't Afro-American. But they didn't know that. So they identified him as a black man, and it killed him. And so the point I was making is that you don't have to be of ambiguous descent, which, by the way, all of us are, for the categories that people try to squeeze you into to be inaccurate.